Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Thursday, February 5th, 2026. And look, I have to be honest with you. If you have glanced at your phone or turned on the TV or scrolled through, literally any feed in the last 48 hours, you are probably exhausted.
It is so loud out there right now, just incredibly loud.
Loud feels like an understatement. I opened my news feed this morning, and it's just a wall of noise. You know, you've got stocks rallying, hitting these fresh highs. You've got crypto doing that wild, volatile dance it loves to do. And I swear, every other ad I see is for some AI-driven forex trading bot that's promising the moon.
It feels like the market is just shouting at us from all sides. And the common thread, the thing in all that noise, is that everyone claims to have the secret. Look at me, look at this chart. This is the one.
Exactly. And that creates this very specific kind of anxiety. We're seeing it in the listener mailbag constantly this week. It's this burning, frantic question. Where is the absolute best place to put my money right now?
Everyone is hunting for that one hot tip.
They want the name of the stock that's going to double by next Tuesday.
And that instinct, it's totally understandable, but it's exactly what we need to dismantle today. Because all the research shows that asking what is the best asset it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how investing works. It's a category error.
Okay, let's unpack that. Why is asking for the best investment the wrong question?
Well, think about it like walking into a massive grocery store and just shouting, "What is the best food?"
Right. People look at you like you're crazy.
Exactly. Are you a bodybuilder? Are you diabetic? Are you training for a marathon? The best food depends entirely on your biology and your goals. Investing is the same thing. There is no universal best asset. There is only the right fuel for your specific engine.
So if the answer isn't a hot tip or some kind of lottery ticket, what are we actually looking for today?
We are looking for a system. A framework. The source material we're diving into today calls it building an engine. We want to construct a portfolio that allows you to compound your money over time without getting, derailed by whatever the headline is on February 5th.
That is the mission. We are building the 2026 investment engine, and looking at the research you brought in, this is structured. This isn't just buy low, sell high. We've got a foundation, a core, and then satellites.
Oh, the satellites. That's the spicy stuff. The optional things like crypto and gold that everyone loves to talk about at dinner parties.
But the sources are really clear on this, right? Very few people actually size those correctly.
They get it completely wrong. And that's why we have to talk about it.
Right. And before we pop the hood and get into the nuts and bolts, we have to drop our usual disclaimer.
Absolutely. This is an educational analysis of a system of financial concepts. This is not personal financial advice. Everyone's context, your age, your goals, your debt load, it's all different.
So what works for a 25-year-old could be, potentially disastrous for a 65-year-old retiree.
Exactly. Context is everything.
Okay, let's dive in. It is so tempting to jump straight to the shiny objects, the crypto, the tech stocks. But the source material is adamant. If you do that first, you are doing it backwards.
You have to start with the foundation. I know nobody wants to talk about emergency funds or insurance when the market is this exciting.
It's first not. It's boring.
It's the most boring part. But there was one line in the research that really stood out to me. It said, "The best investment plan in the world fails if you are forced to sell at the wrong time."
That phrase, forced to sell,
Yeah.
That just sounds like the nightmare scenario.
It is. Imagine this. It's a random Tuesday. The market drops 20%. It happens. Corrections are normal.
Right.
But let's say in that same week, your car transmission just blows up, or you have a medical emergency. If you don't have a cash cushion, where are you getting that money?
You have to raid your investment account.
You have to raid your investment account. So you're opening your app and selling assets while they are down 20% just to pay the mechanic.
And you've just turned a temporary drop into a permanent loss of real money.
You destroyed your own wealth because you didn't have a buffer.
So the foundation isn't about getting rich. It's about protecting the machine.
It's about staying in the game. That's all it is. And the source material breaks this down into 3 pillars.
Okay. Pillar number 1, the emergency fund.
And the job of this money is to be boring. So boring. It is not there to earn a high return. Its only job is to prevent a surprise from becoming a crisis.
And the rule of thumb is what, 3 to 6 months of expenses?
3 to 6 months, yeah. Kept in cash or something very, very liquid. It's the sleep at night money.
Okay, so that's pillar 1. Pillar number 2, high interest debt. The research is pretty aggressive on this one.
It has to be, because this is just a math problem. If you were carrying credit card debt at, say, 20% interest, and you're trying to invest in the stock market, you're swimming upstream against a massive current.
Because the market might give you, what, 8% or 10% in a good year?
On average, historically, yes. But if the market gives you 10% and your Visa card is charging you 20%, you have a guaranteed negative return. You are running up a down escalator.
It's just a massive headwind.
It is. You have to clear the runway before the plane can take off.
And pillar 3 is downside protection.
Right. Your basic insurance, having a budget that actually works. Once you have that base, the emergency fund, the debt under control, the protection, then investing shifts. It stops feeling like gambling.
It starts feeling like building.
Exactly.
I love that shift. So we've poured the concrete, the foundation is set. Now we move to the core, the growth engine. But the playbook says before we buy a single stock, we have to define 2 things: time horizon and risk tolerance.
People mix these up constantly. Time horizon sounds simple, right? When do you need the money? But let's look at the difference. Money you need for a house down payment in 2028 is fundamentally different from money you need for retirement in 2048.
Because if the market crashes in 2028, you can't buy the house.
Exactly. If you need the cash in 2 years, it probably shouldn't be in the stock market at all. The volatility is just too high. But if you need it in 20 years, it absolutely should not be sitting in cash.
Why not? I mean, if cash is safe, why not just keep it under the mattress?
Because of the inflation factor. That's the silent killer. If you just stand still in cash, you are actually moving backward. The Fed aims for about 2% inflation over the long run.
Which means every single year, your dollar buys a little bit less.
A little bit less. And over 20 years, that invisible tax just eats away a huge chunk of your purchasing power. You invest to preserve and grow your ability to buy things in the future.
So how do we build this core engine? The material focuses on 2 main components: stocks for growth and then stabilizers for sanity.
For sanity is a good way to put it. Let's start with stocks. It's important to remember what a stock is. You aren't buying a lottery ticket. You are buying partial ownership in a real business, a claim on their future earnings.
But the strategy here isn't to go pick the next Amazon, is it? Because that feels like what everyone tries to do.
That is the temptation. But the data on this is just, it's brutal. Very few people, I mean almost no one, can consistently beat the market by picking individual stocks. The source material uses a great analogy. Don't try to find the needle in the haystack.
Just buy the haystack.
Just buy the haystack.
Meaning buy the whole market.
Precisely. The simplest way to do that is through index funds or ETFs, exchange-traded funds. Instead of betting on one CEO or one product, you own a broad slice of the entire economy. If one company fails, it doesn't sink you.
And if another one takes off, you capture that growth automatically.
You capture it. It's the ultimate don't put all your eggs in one basket move.
Yeah.
But there is a silent killer we have to watch out for here, and the research really hammered this home fees.
This is huge, isn't it? It's the most boring but dangerous detail.
It is. A 1% difference in fees sounds tiny. You might think, oh, 1%, that's nothing. But you pay that on your entire balance every single year.
How much does that actually hurt, though, really?
The math is shocking. If you invest over 30 or 40 years, a 1% fee can reduce your final portfolio value by as much as 25%.
Wait, hold on. You lose a quarter of your total wealth just from a 1% fee.
Yes, because you aren't just losing the fee itself. You are losing the compound growth that money would have earned if it had stayed in your account. It's compounding in reverse.
Wow. Okay, so keep those costs as low as possible. We're talking, what, like 0.05% or lower?
The lower, the better.
Okay, that is a wake-up call.
Yeah.
So broad diversification, low costs. That's the growth engine. Now let's talk component B, the stabilizers. Bonds, cash-like assets.
Their role is simple. Liquidity and sanity. Stocks are volatile. They bounce around. Stabilizers reduce the overall swing of the portfolio. They're the shock absorbers.
And we have to mention the context here. It's early 2026. The Fed cut rates 3 times in 2025, and they held steady in January. How does that change things?
Well, it's interesting context, but the goal isn't to predict the Fed's next move. I mean, if you try to time interest rates, you will almost certainly lose. The goal is to build an all-weather vehicle.
One that survives no matter what the Fed does.
Exactly. You want a mix of assets that can survive if rates go down, but also survive if they stay flat or even go up.
So the core is stocks for growth, stabilizers for defense, keep it simple, keep it low cost. It seems too easy for some people.
It does, and that's why people get restless. They want the action. They want the spice.
Which brings us to the satellites.
Right. Now, the rule here is strict. These are optional. You do not need them to have a successful retirement. And if you do use them, they have to be sized correctly so they don't hijack the entire plan.
Let's run through the menu. We got a lot of questions on these. Satellite number 1, real estate.
A classic.
Yeah.
The pros are obvious, cash flow from rent, and it generally keeps up with inflation. But the cons are real. It's illiquid. You can't just sell a bathroom if you need quick cash.
Right. And transactions are expensive. Now, the source mentions you can do it directly. Be a landlord, fix toilets, or buy REITs.
Right. Real estate investment trusts. Think of them like mutual funds for buildings. You buy a share, and that company owns malls, hospitals, data centers. You get the dividends, but you never have to take a 3 a.m. phone call about a leaking roof.
That sounds significantly better to me. Okay, satellite 2, precious metals. Gold and silver. I used to think these were basically the same investment, just different colors, but the research makes a huge distinction here.
They're very different animals. Gold is a pure diversifier. It's not a business. It doesn't produce cash flow. It's basically insurance against uncertainty.
You own it because you're worried about currency collapse or extreme inflation.
Right. But silver has a split personality. It is a precious metal, yes, but it is also a critical industrial metal. It's used in electronics, solar panels, batteries.
So it actually has a job to do.
It has a job to do. And this creates different volatility patterns. Silver can move based on monetary fear like gold, but it can also skyrocket because of a boom in solar manufacturing. It has that industrial demand driver that gold just doesn't have.
Okay, satellite number 3, the one everyone asks about. Crypto.
The high volatility optionality. That's the polite term this source material uses.
AKA the roller coaster.
Exactly. The range of outcomes here is just massive. It could boom and reshape finance, or it could go to zero. So the advice from the source is all about sizing. Keep it small, 1 to 5% of your portfolio.
Why that specific range?
It comes down to asymmetry. At 1 to 5%, if crypto goes to zero, it hurts, but it doesn't ruin your life. You're still on track for retirement.
But if it goes 10x or 20x?
That small slice is enough to actually make a meaningful difference to your bottom line. It's a bet with capped downside and theoretically uncapped upside.
But, and this is a big but, the source emphasizes this in bold letters. Avoid leverage.
Please do not borrow money to buy volatile assets. That removes the safety net entirely.
Good advice. And finally, satellite number 4, forex, the global currency market.
This is the largest market on the planet, driven by interest rates, trade flows, global politics. But for the individual investor, the source really treats this as a skill-based market. It's not a buy and hold thing like the S&P 500.
It mentions social trading or copy trading as an entry point. Can you explain that? It sounds a little like fantasy football for finance.
That's actually a great analogy. In social trading, instead of you trying to become a macroeconomist yourself, you pick a manager or a trader with a proven track record, and you automatically copy their trades.
So if they buy the yen, my account buys the yen.
Exactly. But the risk shifts. You aren't betting on the yen anymore. You're betting on the manager's skill. You have to vet their track record just as rigorously as you would a stock. If they melt down, you melt down.
So we've built the vehicle. We have the boring foundation, the solid core, maybe a little satellite spice. But a car doesn't go anywhere without a driver. We have to talk about execution.
This is where behavior beats intelligence every single time. You can have the smartest plan on paper, but if you can't execute it when things get scary, it's worthless.
Okay, let's settle a debate. You get a bonus at work, an inheritance, a lump sum of cash. Do you dump it all in the market at once, lump sum investing, or do you drip feed it in over time?
The classic debate. Okay, here's the verdict from the data. Lump sum usually wins mathematically.
Really?
Yes, because the market historically goes up more often than it goes down. So statistically, having your money working in the market sooner is better than holding it in cash.
But hold on, that sounds terrifying. What if I dump my whole bonus in today and tomorrow the market crashes 10%?
And that is exactly why the correct mathematical answer might be the wrong human answer. While lump sum wins on a spreadsheet, dollar cost averaging drip feeding the money wins psychologically.
Because you don't feel like an idiot if the market drops right after you buy.
Right. If you spread it out over 12 months and the market drops, you actually feel good. You think, great, my next contribution is buying shares at a discount. You're rooting for a sale.
So the answer is?
Choose the one that ensures you actually sleep at night. If you're nervous, drip feed it. If you're cold and logical, lump sum it. Optimize for consistency, not perfection.
Speaking of nerves, let's talk about the all-time high trap. It's February 2026. People are looking at the charts, seeing these record numbers and thinking, I missed it. It's too high. I'll wait for a dip.
That is a classic wealth killer. History shows us that markets hit new highs frequently. I mean, that's what they do. They grow. If you look back at 2013, 2017, 2020, the market was at all-time highs then, too.
And if you sat on the sidelines waiting for a dip,
you missed years of compounding. And you often end up buying back in much, much higher than where you started. Waiting for the perfect entry point is usually a losing game. Just get in the car.
Okay, so once you're in, you can't just fall asleep at the wheel. We need to talk about rebalancing.
This is just the discipline of selling what grew and buying what lagged. Let's say your target is 80% stocks and 20% bonds. Stocks have a massive year. Suddenly your portfolio drifts, and now it's 90% stocks.
So you're taking way more risk than you originally planned.
Right. So rebalancing just means you sell some of those winning stocks and buy more bonds to get back to 80-20.
But isn't that counterintuitive? It feels like you're cutting the flowers and watering the weeds. Why would I sell my winner?
It feels wrong, but it's actually brilliant risk management. It forces you to buy low and sell high automatically. You are taking profit from the thing that is expensive and moving it into the thing that is cheap, all without having to predict the future.
And the ultimate tool to make all of this happen, automation.
The robot is your friend. Look, if you have to make a conscious decision to transfer money and invest every single month, life will get in the way. You'll forget. Or you'll see a scary news headline and you'll hesitate.
You'll try to outsmart the market.
Exactly. Automation just removes the decision. It turns investing from a chore into a habit. You want to be rich by default, not by willpower.
So let's recap the 2026 playbook. It's really a 4-step process.
Step 1, the foundation. Emergency fund, debt plan, insurance. Don't skip this, or you'll become a forced seller.
Step 2, the core. Diversified, low-cost stocks for growth, stabilizers for sanity, buy the haystack.
Step 3, the satellites. Keep them small, keep them optional. Don't let the spice ruin the meal.
And step 4, automation. Set it up so it happens while you sleep.
It sounds so simple when you lay it out like that.
It does, doesn't it?
But simple tends to be resilient. Complex plans break under stress. Simple plans survive.
And that's the mindset shift we need. The goal isn't to win 2026.
No. If you are trying to win this year, you are probably gambling. The real goal is to ensure you are still investing in 2036 and in 2046. The goal is longevity. Compounding takes time, and you have to survive long enough for it to work its magic.
And here is where we want to leave you today. A final provocative thought from the source material. I want you to look at your portfolio, or your lack of one, and ask yourself this one question.
Are you building an engine that can survive a decade? Or are you just collecting lottery tickets?
That's the question. Thanks for diving in with us today. We'll see you on the next one.
Take care.